Buenas noches, bienvenidos y bienvenidas al Sofá, el programa de la diversidad sexual y de género de Canal Capital. Desde ya los invito y las invito a que nos sigan en las redes sociales. Estamos en Facebook, Twitter e Instagram como el Sofá Capital. Esta noche tenemos un invitado internacional, una persona de gran importancia para los sectores LGBTI en el mundo, especialmente en Estados Unidos. Él es fundador y presidente de la organización Freedom to Marry, que sería algo así como libertad para casarse, libertad de matrimonio. Él es Evan Wolfson. Evan, welcome to the couch.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
Okay, let's get into the thing. You have an organization called Freedom to Marry. So tell us a bit about it. What is the goal, the strategy?
Freedom to Marry is the campaign to win marriage throughout the entire United States. It takes a movement to achieve this kind of change, and it has been a movement of many, many people, many, many organizations, many, many battles over many, many years, all doing their part. But at the same time, it hasn't just been a random series of episodes. There has been a strategy that we in the United States have followed to achieve this win. And Freedom to Marry is the campaign that was created to drive the strategy, not to do every part, but to make sure that all the parts come together and that where there are gaps, we can fill it to achieve the strategy toward the goal of winning marriage nationwide.
Very nice. Okay, we will be back to that theme later. Why don't you tell us a bit why in this moment is so important the Supreme Court? What is the goal to get there?
Yes, well, this is a very big moment for us in the United States and hopefully with repercussions around the world, because this strategy that we have been working to build toward a victory that brings the freedom to marry to everyone throughout the United States is now on the verge, we hope, of winning. We have been building all these years toward the Supreme Court and to having a ruling from the United States Supreme Court that will bring everyone in every state, all 50 states, to the freedom to marry. The strategy always said that we don't have to win every single state, but we have to win enough states and enough public support to create the climate for the Supreme Court to finish the job. And we now believe, on the strength of all the progress and all the momentum and all the gains that we have won over 40 years, that now is the moment when the Supreme Court, we hope, will rule in our favor and finish the job.
Okay, you say 40 years, it means we're talking about Stonewall, from Stonewall until today.
Pretty much in the immediate aftermath of Stonewall in 1969, gay couples began seeking the freedom to marry. And by 1972, 3 years after Stonewall, there were at least 3 major cases that had made their way through the states, one of which reached the US Supreme Court. All these cases were rubber stamped away. The country wasn't ready, the courts were not willing, and these couples did not get the freedom to marry that they fought for. For 40 years now, we have been building this critical mass of states and critical mass of public opinion and racking up victory after victory with some defeats along the way. And now we're back in front of the Supreme Court with 4 cases from 4 different states in one big case that has now been argued to the Supreme Court. And we hope that the Supreme Court this time will get it right, just as all the other courts that we've now won over these 40 years have done. And so we're looking to a ruling probably in the last week of June, and we're very, very hopeful that we've now made the case not only in the court, but in the court of public opinion.
Okay, so we can say maybe looking backwards that we need at least 40 years to change population's mind, to change institutions, because we all live in this world, in each country has its own evolution. We can say that maybe 40 years, it's a time to get from one place to another?
Well, look, I think there are many lessons that people can take from our work in the United States and from the progress and from the defeats we've had along the way. But I don't think there's one formula. I don't think there's one rule. Every country is different. Every society is different. And we also can all build on what we all are doing. The progress in the United States moved quicker because we saw some victories in other countries. And in turn, those other countries benefited from the work we were doing here in the United States. And so here in Colombia and other countries, hopefully you can harness the work that we are doing while adding your own work to the challenges and the particularities of Colombia, which are different from the United States.
So maybe we can say that today it's not only a question of one country, but each country is getting its own fight, but every fight is contributing to other spaces.
Absolutely. This is a question of universal human rights, and the tactics of work in a democracy are similar, even though the legal systems and the cultures may be different. So we can all benefit from what we do. We can all look at the example of what we achieve, and we all have to stick it with it together, because we're not really done until we've won everywhere.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about Proposition 8, which is something that you said before. It's a little bit ancient history, but it's interesting to know what it is and what was the fight.
Well, Proposition 8 was one of the many battles that we saw along the way. I mentioned that in the United States, this work began in earnest with this first wave of marriage litigation in the very early 1970s. And all of those cases were rubber stamped away. The second wave of marriage litigation, brought by couples, again, seeking the freedom to marry, came almost 20 years later, very late 80s, early 90s. And the most important of those cases was the Hawaii case. And it was the case in Hawaii brought by 3 couples seeking the freedom to marry in the 1990s that really launched this ongoing global movement. The work here in Colombia, the work in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, much of it really was sparked by this case in Hawaii that put the question again on the world. And this time, when we brought the cases in Hawaii and some of these others, but particularly Hawaii, unlike the first wave of marriage litigation, the courts said, wait a minute, if the government wants to discriminate, at least it has to show a reason. And as a result, we were given our day in court, a chance to actually come into court and have the government show what's the reason for this discrimination. And in that courtroom in Hawaii in 1996, at a trial, we showed that there is no good reason. The government had nothing. They couldn't prove a reason. And as a result, in 1996 in Hawaii, we won the world's first ever ruling in favor of the freedom to marry. And that sent electricity all around the world, and colleagues in other countries, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Canada, in South Africa, and other parts of the world began working, just as we in the United States redoubled our work to move the question forward. Well, what happened in Hawaii was we won in court, but there was a political attack, and the anti-gay forces mounted a fierce campaign, and they amended the Constitution in Hawaii to block the victory. So the victory we won in court, we didn't hold politically. Okay. 10 years later, the same thing happened in California. We won in court. We showed that there is no good reason. The courts upheld the Constitution. But again, there was a political attack mounted called Proposition 8 that put a ballot measure on in which there was a vote, and the Constitution of California was amended to prevent the court ruling from having its full effect and to take away the freedom to marry we won. So the lesson that came out of Hawaii and came out of California 10 years later in Proposition 8 was, number one, the government has no good reason for discriminating. Number two, we can prove that. We can make this case. We can win. And number three, just doing the work in court, just doing litigation, leaving it to the lawyers is not enough. What's needed is political organizing, public education, direct action, millions of people talking to their neighbors, their friends, in order to create the climate that allows us not only to win, but to hold the win. And so that campaign really sparked us in the United States to take our work to a much higher level and to really do the work necessary to, again, create the public climate that would allow our court victories to succeed and to stand. Proposition 8 itself temporarily took away marriage, but we won it back. And we won other states. And we continued to build momentum, and now we're back again in front of the US Supreme Court with a majority of Americans, 63%, now in support of the freedom to marry. And with 37 states out of 50 in which gay couples can marry, and with this very, very powerful case to the Supreme Court that we hope will result in the final victory. So the lessons of Proposition 8 are you sometimes lose, but if you keep fighting and if you do the fight right, you can win.
There's something I always ask to our guests, and it's why gay marriage is so important in the LGBT agenda, even if it's not the priority for all of these groups, LGBTI. It's more gay and maybe lesbians from one specific part of the population, but there's another needs very important for trans people, for access to education, to healthcare, etc., etc. How is it's so important, this subject?
Sure. Well, you asked actually a lot of questions there. I mean, one point I would make is that we're not fighting for gay marriage. I never use the phrase gay marriage. We're fighting for marriage, the same marriage that non-gay people have, the freedom to marry. And we don't want something separate or lesser or other or new or invented or part called gay marriage. We want to remove a restriction that is unfairly placed on people who happen to be gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender who want to choose to marry the person they love without restriction based on sex or sexual orientation. We are fighting for the freedom to marry. In the same way, we're not fighting for gay employment, we're fighting for employment. We're not fighting for education, we're fighting for education. We're fighting for the opportunity to participate fully and equally in society and to contribute to society without restriction based on gender identity, sex, or sexual orientation. Secondly, no one thing is everything. So nobody believes that we only want one thing, no matter how big it might be. We want the freedom to marry. We want protection against employment discrimination. We want access to housing. We want our seniors to be taken care of as they age and to be able to age with dignity and not have to go back into the closet. We want our young people to be secure and protected and respected and able to dream big dreams and to not be harassed and bullied and denied education. We want people who are transgender to have a full opportunity to participate. We want all of it. We want to fight HIV/AIDS, and we want to ensure access to health care. And so we should never take one part of what we want and pit it against the other things we want. Why do we have to choose one thing or the other? We want it all, and we're not done until we have everything for everyone. All that said, I argued in my law school thesis back in 1983 and have been working ever since on two beliefs. Number one, that marriage is important. Marriage is the gateway to a vast array of tangible and intangible meanings and protections and responsibilities. And to be denied marriage and all that it brings, tangibly and intangibly, is to be denied something very, very significant. And you can't say you're for equality if you acquiesce in exclusion from the central social and legal institution of this and every other human society. So marriage is important. And secondly, I argued in 1983 and have believed ever since and have been working, and I believe history has now vindicated this is true, that in fighting for marriage, we would be claiming a vocabulary of love and commitment and connection and family and inclusion that would transform non-gay people's understanding of who we are in a way that would advance us not only to win marriage, but on the whole range of things that we care about. So fighting for marriage is not just fighting for marriage, it's fighting for more. It's fighting for a changed, transformed understanding that enables us to make more advances on everything we care about. And if you look at the history of our movement, certainly in the United States, in the non-marriage chapter, the part where we were not fighting for marriage, and now the marriage chapter, we've won more non-discrimination protections. more gender identity protections, more safe school programs, more acknowledgement of gay seniors and their needs, more protections and acknowledgement and support across the board during the marriage fight than we did when we weren't talking about marriage. So nobody believes, including me, that marriage is the only thing that matters. But it is very, very clear from history that the engagement over marriage has advanced our movement, advanced our cause, and helped transform non-gay people's understanding by giving us a common vocabulary that has helped them to understand something that they should have always understood, but didn't.
There's something, also a kind of question of counter question, which is that there's many people thinking that many of the bad things we have in this society comes from this idea of marriage, which is very double, very hypocrite, excuse me, because it's always been very for the male, not for the woman. I mean, there's a model very archaic in behind. Why is it we should fight for this institution, which sometimes seems a bit, how do you say, tired, and not maybe looking for a new way of relation people?
Well, you know, first of all, my campaign is called Freedom to Marry, not mandatory marriage. Everybody should get to make their own decision. If people feel what you just said, they don't have to get married. But right now, they don't have a choice in Colombia. That choice is being imposed on them because of their sex or the sex of their partner, because of their sexual orientation. And that's discrimination. And all discrimination is bad. But the worst discrimination is when it's imposed by the government, when it's the government denying people their full range of choice and freedom and opportunity based on discriminatory bases such as sex or sexual orientation or gender identity. So I think everybody should have a right to believe whatever they want to believe, but everybody should have the right to make that choice and not have it imposed by the government or by somebody else's ideology. Secondly, I would say, if we really took that logic and applied it, we would be saying gay people should not go to universities because universities have historically been discriminatory and oppressive and patriarchal, etc. But nobody thinks that. What we all believe is we should come into these things, we should take our ownership, take our place, and transform them, work within them, own them. When voting used to be confined only to men, it was patriarchal. It was oppressive of women. But nobody believes women shouldn't be allowed to vote. We believe women should be able to vote and claim the power that comes with inclusion. So I really reject that argument, but you know, it's a free country. It's a free country in the United States. People can believe whatever they want to believe, but they shouldn't impose it on other people. And the other point I want to make is that while the freedom to marry is first and foremost, in my mind, about love and commitment and being part of the family, part of the society, being able to claim your full place and have people understand the connection. It is also a gateway to important legal and economic protections and responsibilities that mean a great deal in people's lives and that are particularly important for the most vulnerable, for people who are poor, for people who are ill, for immigrants, for people who are struggling with a life passage, death or illness or disease or divorce or a breakup. And so it's even more important for the most vulnerable to have that freedom to marry and to have the access to all the intangible and tangible support that marriage brings.
Well, that's great. That's great opinion. The goal of our show is absolutely to confront ideas and to have these new lights. Evan, let's keep talking about marriage, of course. My question would be, what can the USA and Colombia learn one each other from this fight for the rights, for the LGBT rights?
I think one of the common lessons is that while litigation and making the legal argument under the Constitution is a central part of the strategy to win here in Colombia, as it is for us in the United States, it's not enough. And so what we need people to do here in Colombia, as we learned to do in the United States, is we need people breaking the silence and talking neighbor to neighbor, family member to family member, coworker to coworker, about who gay people are in Colombia and why marriage matters, why discrimination must end for the good of Colombia and for the good of families. The more people, gay people who tell their stories, non-gay people who talk about their values of fairness and a just society for everyone, the more people here talk in personal terms, in local terms, in real terms, neighbor to neighbor, the more we create the climate that will allow the Constitutional Court to do its job, that will allow the president and the Congress and other officials to step up and do the right thing. You know, in the United States, as we mentioned, we're now in front of the US Supreme Court, which is what our strategy has always been building toward. But in the last 2 years, building to the Supreme Court, we have won 65 court rulings in favor of the freedom to marry in a whole mix of courts all across the country, federal and state, appellate court and trial court, judges appointed by Republican, conservative presidents and governors, as well as Democratic and more progressive governors. 65 courts have now looked at the evidence, looked at the arguments, heard the stories, and ruled in favor of the freedom to marry. And in all of those 65 court rulings, my favorite passage came from the case in which we brought the freedom to marry to Utah, the most conservative state in the United States. Red state, religious state, Utah now has the freedom to marry. And the judge in that ruling wrote, "It's not the Constitution that has changed. It's our knowledge of what it means to be lesbian or gay." And in that passage, the judge captured the strategy that we have been working and the way in which we have made this progress in the United States and the reason that we hope we win. It's not that the Constitution was unclear before. It's not that the law is difficult to figure out. The law in both the United States and in Colombia talks of the equality and the dignity of every person. The law in both countries talks about the freedom to marry and the importance of marriage, and therefore that the government must have a good reason for denying something so important to people. That's clear in the law. What we need to do is not only make the legal argument, we need to get people to see how this command of our Constitution applies to gay people, which means we have to help them understand who gay people are, our families, the children we're raising, the way in which we contribute to the society, the way in which we too worry about our aging parents, the way in which we argue over who's going to take out the garbage, the way in which we love each other and make a commitment to each other and deserve that same commitment in law that is called marriage. So it's not just in Colombia or in the United States, the law that we have to work with the similarities. It's the similar need to tell our stories and to engage people personally here in Colombia, neighbor to neighbor, city to city, as we did in the United States, and as we have to continue doing in the United States, because we're not finished either.
The other day I heard something you said which is very interesting, very powerful. You said arguments do not write by themselves, by itself. Fundraising do not achieve by itself. It's necessary to move, to as you say, to speak to your family, to your neighbors. Why is it so important to create this good atmosphere? Are the politicians, for example, listening or feeling what is happening? Maybe there are some of them who agree for the same-sex marriage, but they do not. They are not able to say, okay, let's go. They are waiting for the society to grow up.
Yeah, look, in Colombia and in the United States, we are lucky. We live in societies that are committed to the rule of law, that promise freedom and equality and dignity to everyone. Both societies are not perfect, but they both have that vision, that promise, those constitutions, those systems. But in both countries, these promises don't come magically by themselves. People have to work for them. In democracies, we have to work We have to talk. We have to organize. We have to come together. We have to do our individual part, and we have to band together in organizations to create the space that enables decision makers, elected and judicial, to do the right thing. If a constitutional guarantee were so simple as you put a peso in and you get the answer out, it would be done, we'd be finished. But that's not how it works. And so we each have an obligation, and we are lucky to live in a country where we can make a difference, but we have to make the difference. And what we have to do is do our personal part of talking to the people in our circles, because each one of us is the best ambassador to some people, the people who care about us, the people who connect to us, the people who relate to us, who look like us, who think like us, the people who will care about us. Each one can do our individual part and must do our individual part. But we can also, as individuals, band together as organizations. We can support teams, organizations like Colombia Diversa, organizations that whether they're labor unions or business groups or professional organizations or women's organizations, who represent all of us. And by contributing to those organizations and helping them do their part on behalf of all of us, they can advance the cause as organizations while we create the climate that enables the whole team to succeed.
Maybe we could extend this way of participating. Is the coming out a way of activism?
Absolutely. Coming out is enormously important because it's by allowing other people to understand who we are, not prejudices, not stereotypes, not fear, not ignorance, not indifference, but real people they can care about, they connect to, they can relate to, they can understand to. It's by opening that door that we enable people to come through and rise to fairness. And so coming out is an absolutely important part. And by the way, coming out is something we as gay people and as transgender people need to do in order to help people rise. But coming out is also something non-gay people can do. Non-gay people can come out about their support. Non-gay people can come out about their shared values of a just society and of the gay people they know or the transgender people they know, and why they want to live in a society that respects everyone and that they understand that the rule of law is only secure when everybody is protected. So we need non-gay people to be part of this conversation, and we as gay people need to welcome them in and help them find their place in this cause of making the country, the society, one that we want for everybody.
Well, one of the things we try to do in this show is not to speak only to LGBT struggles or issues,
right,
but we speak always about diversity, sexual diversity, so that we can make a conversation between all the persons in society.
Well, that's right. And actually, particularly with regard to marriage, it's very clear that the connections are there because marriage has always been a battleground on which larger questions of what kind of society it's going to be have been contested. Gay people are not the first people to experience discrimination in marriage. In many countries, including my own, the United States, the government imposed race restrictions on who could marry whom. The government imposed restrictions on people who needed to end a failed or abusive relationship, and we had to fight for the freedom to divorce and turn marriage from an institution based on compulsion into an institution based on choice and commitment. We needed to end race restrictions. We needed to end the subordination of women. Marriage, for much of its history, as you mentioned earlier, took women and made them the property of men. And they actually lost rights when they got married. But we changed that. We changed the law. We reclaimed it for women and men so that both can be treated equally and come together in a union based on love that enriches everybody. So time and time again in our country, the United States, and here in Colombia, we have on this battleground of marriage fought important questions of what kind of society this is going to be. And it's very fitting and proper that gay people now stand on the same battlefield seeking the same full participation and the full dignity and the full opportunity to contribute to the larger society.
I must avoid that. I like very much your speech about love. I think one of the arguments you said that it's a vocabulary, it's something that touches everybody, and that's a very, very beautiful argument which takes enormous strength to win these battles.
Thank you, and it happens to be true.
Evan, actually, we can say that we're very close to this equality of rights, at least in the United States, at least in Colombia, we're close. Maybe not.
Well, we certainly have made a lot of progress,
Yes.
and we all have a lot to celebrate. But I think we have a lot more work to do, certainly in the United States and in Colombia, where
Absolutely.
we are close to certain big victories that make a huge difference. And we have made enormous progress in changing people's understanding. But we remain very, very discriminated against, and we also have many people who are vulnerable in different parts of our society, even while some of us have moved further. So I think we have a lot of work left to do.
Absolutely, I agree. I didn't want it
Yeah.
to say that that's not the reality. But in some spaces, in some places, some big cities, some gay cities, we feel that this integration, this discrimination has ended, and maybe we can feel a kind of society where it is absolutely absorbed. You can do what you want, you can be who you want. Maybe we can start talking about post marriage discussion. What would it be?
Yeah, well, I don't think so at all. I mean, both in Colombia and even in the United States, where we hope we're going to win in June, we are not done. Neither one is done. And even after we win the freedom to marry, if we are lucky and do win in June in the United States, I don't believe in post. I don't believe that we should be pivoting from one thing to another. I believe in many ways we will be able to harness the power of what we have won to this conversation that we will have just brought to many of the places in the United States and around the world. And so even though we will have won in the law, the conversation about marriage, the conversation about families, the conversation about being part of the community will have really only just begun. And so we have the opportunity to use this vocabulary of marriage, of connection, of love, of family, of inclusion, and the visibility that we can bring to more stories and more people and more families and more people in love and getting married and raising kids. We want to build on all of that, not check it off and move to the next thing. We want to harness the power of this progress to the work that still remains. And of course, that work still remains in the United States. We still do not have a federal non-discrimination law. We still do not have the legal protections we need in most states. And it's not only about the law. It's also about the lived experience that we want everyone to have, whether they live in a rural part of the country or an urban part of the country, whether they live in a progressive community and family, or whether they live in communities that have been more resistant or hostile or unsure or not yet part of the conversation. So that we have a lot of work left to do. But we can celebrate the progress, and we can celebrate the fact that we live in societies where our work can bear fruit, where we can make a difference if we keep doing the work.
One of the things about this debate, this discussion about marriage, is that LGBT people is discussing, is taking the word to say what they think a family would be, could be, with same-sex parent, with new ways of love, as you say, of making a family. And that is what would be in the future the victory, to have this right, because today some people say you cannot talk about family, you are not a family.
Yeah, I don't really see it as so much a new way of making a family. I see it as more people being acknowledged as being part of family, and the law catching up with those families and making sure they're all fully protected. At the center of what's best for children is love and good parenting and parents who care about them and self-sacrifice and support and dedication. And Two men can do that, two women can do that, a man and woman can do that, and single parents can do that, and kin, extended families can do that. And we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity and that the best interest of every child is respected under the law. And the best way to do that is for the law to not discriminate, to not try to pick one kind of family, but to recognize that what really counts is the love and commitment and the quality of the parenting and the support that every family deserves.
So maybe we can quote again this judge you told before, saying that maybe the laws and the Constitution are not changing. What is changing is our knowledge about the family.
Well, the knowledge is what is changing, and it's the work we have to do here in Colombia as in the United States. We need to make sure that more people come to understand who we really are and why full inclusion and legal dignity and support matters. The Constitution hasn't changed. The Constitution's guarantee of liberty, of equality, of dignity, of the freedom to marry, that's always been there in both Colombia and the United States. But the law, the implementation of that command, that has to change. Because right now the law in Colombia, and right now the law in the United States, at least 13 states, has not lived up to the command of the Constitution, the supreme law. And so the work we have in both our countries is to fix the law to make sure that it's consistent with the Constitution's guarantees that are the most important values of our societies and that belong to everyone, including lesbians and gay men and people who are transgender.
Perfectly. Is there something else you want to tell us you think it's important?
I think one thing that's always important to underscore is that this is not about telling any church or temple or synagogue or mosque who they must marry. This is not about telling religion what it must do or what it must believe or what it must preach. That's up to religion. And in both the United States and Colombia, we have freedom of religion, and it's important. But at the same time, in order to protect freedom of religion and in order to protect personal freedom, just as we don't want the government telling churches what to do, we don't want churches telling the government who can get a legal marriage license. The churches should not be dictating to the government who gets protection and who does not, because the government protects all of us and belongs to all of us. And in a free society, that's the way in which we preserve both religious freedom, because there are people who are religious who believe that gay people should be treated with dignity and believe that society should respect everyone and believe that the law should respect other families. There are other people with different religious beliefs, and they're all free to believe whatever they want. The government is not a weapon to pick one or the other. The government has to assure the full security, protection, and dignity of every citizen.
Absolutely. Well, Evan, I would like to thank you for coming to Colombia and share your knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the couch.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Bueno, y a ustedes muchísimas gracias por habernos acompañado la noche de hoy. Quisiera aprovechar la oportunidad para agradecerle a la organización Colombia Diversa, a la organización Fundación por el Buen Gobierno y a la Universidad de los Andes por habernos brindado la oportunidad de tener a este gran personaje en nuestro sofá y compartir con ustedes su conocimiento. Nos vemos dentro de 8 días. Recuerden reportar sintonía en las redes sociales. Estamos en Twitter, Facebook e Instagram como El Sofá Capital. Nos vemos entonces dentro de 8 días en El Sofá de Canal Capital, la televisión más humana. Gracias. Buenas noches.